Well, hey, welcome to another episode of Horror Score. We are hosts Jesse and
Vanessa.
in this week's episode, for episode 30, is
The Alan Parsons, The Blair Witch Project.
is that a music joke?
Yeah, you wouldn't understand.
I wouldn't understand. I don't know if Weird Al didn't write it, or it's not a movie score.
If it wasn't Stan Bush's The Touch.
It's a good song.
It is a good song. But there's other good songs.
There are. We own it.
Speaking
obviously.
of movies without a soundtrack.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? There's a little bit of sound on the end credits. There's like a note or two to kind of draw it out. Yeah. I have owned this DVD for probably 20 years. This is in the first 5 DVDs
I was
that
7.
I ever bought. I was 50. Yeah, and here we are. And I know on Horror Score, like our shtick is, usually we review weirder, smaller, lesser known movies.
But can I to a point to that whole, you've owned this for 20 years.
Yeah, let's do it.
And I was 7. I was literally 7 when I saw this.
Okay.
I was 6 or something. Like, I saw it when it came out. My family was kind of all about it. I remember my grandpa was still alive, but he was towards the end. And so I was living with him at his house, and that's where I watched it. I watched it at my grandparents' house.
Did you watch it with them or did you watch it alone?
I watched it with them. So my grandpa was, he was only 64, but, so I watched it with my grandpa, my mom, my older brother, who was really into it. I think he's the reason that we actually watched it. It was because he's 9 years, so he must have been 15.
Well, all right, honest, legit question. How did they like it?
Well, they're very much like connoisseurs of cinema kind of people, and I didn't hear anything. They love to make fun of things when they're not good, and I don't remember them making fun of it, which really speaks loudly of a horror film, considering how easily they're made fun of.
I saw this in the theater, and I was enthralled through the whole movie, and I knew it wasn't real, but a lot of the buzz at the time was that this was real footage recovered from the woods.
Which, I'm sorry, you have to be stupid to think that. And so to be sitting in the theater and then be mad when you see that it's not real is like going to see a Victorian era movie and say this didn't take place during the Victorian era.
What I was going to say is just that I was captivated watching this movie. It was a new thing for me. I'd never seen a found footage film. This isn't the first found footage film, but it was the first one I'd ever seen.
Same.
And the movie ends, and I'm like, all right, okay, all right. That was an experience when some like jocks behind me were like, this movie was stupid, and everyone in the theater started to laugh, and people started making fun of it. I think I was the only one. I was like looking around for some other people to like make eye contact and maybe like find someone else who was like, this was a good movie. But there wasn't. Everyone in the theater hated this movie when I saw it.
I love that. It's like they were like, you tried to pull a fast one on me. You tried to make me think this was real, and I didn't think it was real.
Here on Horror Score, our whole purpose is to run a movie through our filter and see how it comes out. We rate movies on 5 categories where they can earn anywhere from 0 to 20 points. And I think I'm ready to dive into that if you are.
I was born ready.
All right. Well, our first category on Horror Score is story. And do you want to start us off?
Sure. So the things that encompass story are obviously plot, but it also has to do with characters and that kind of thing. And even though documentary style, you have to take into account every actor who was hired and starred in this, even though they're pretending to be real people, were actors. And I think that story-wise, it was your classic, like, researching a folklore thing. We're going to go see if if there's anything to this Blair Witch myth folklore. And yeah, that was okay. But for me, where story earned its points was the very realistic townspeople. Yes. Whenever they did the fake interviewing of those people, I was like, no, those people absolutely exist. I was like, you caught them outside a diner smoking a cigarette because they're real. And Heather, because so it's three main people,
Yeah,
Heather, Josh, and Mike.
Yeah.
Heather, absolutely a very realistic, controlling character, and she has a total like character arc like you would expect from, you know, classic storytelling. Like she starts out controlling and unbearable, and you know she has like a breaking point and personality change based on the events of the movie. So 9 points. Otherwise it wouldn't have gotten those points for me because the myth didn't do a lot, but I think character wise they got 9 for me.
I gave it 12. Yeah, I like the townsfolk. I like the folklore and the legend. It was cool to find out like later that those actors, they all went by their real names to like add to the like
Mystery,
realism also of like,
real?
yeah, they're like, you know,
because that's how they advertised the film.
Yeah.
And that's why those jocks were sitting in the theater going, this isn't real. It's because they did an extraordinary job advertising the film as
this really
these
happened.
3 people actually went missing.
I was happy with it. I knowing it wasn't real, still, because the first 50 minutes are a slow burn and you're starting to like, nothing supernatural has happened. You start to buy into what's going on. That when very small supernatural things or disturbances in the night start to happen, it's easier to buy into them. Like, what was that noise? You know, what is going on? And I think that some of the fear, like, I don't get afraid at movies, and people love or hate this movie.
That's the point. Like,
yeah.
No, I hate that. Like, I watch horror movies because I like to kind of suspend belief sometimes and go, oh my gosh, this is actually scaring me, and I have a pretty strong threshold for what's real and what's imagined. So I hate when people go into horror movies going, I'm already like predicting that this isn't real, or I have to go buff or like masculine into this, into watching this. Like, you're not more of a man because you knew it was a puppet the whole time.
I knew that puppet wasn't real. I started watching horror movies around 6 or 7 years old, and many of them scared me. But by the time I was about 14, it didn't happen so often. But this movie, even though I was in the theater with 100 people around me, I felt it. I felt like, you know, I was afraid for those people. Every time I go camping, whenever I hear anything, whether it's a raccoon or a squirrel, I immediately assume it's a monster or a huge bear that's going to kill me. So,
and anytime you're camping by day 8, like, I can understand how they like wrapped on day 8. They were like, all right, we're done. We're not.
Yeah,
we're done.
I think 4 nights is my record.
And you saw your first horror film by the time you were 6 or 7?
Yeah.
I saw my first found footage horror film when I was 6 or 7, so I think I think the Blair Witch had a profound effect on me. Do you want to lead us into a villain?
We'll just talk about the Blair Witch. This is one of the most difficult times I've ever had writing a category. So my thought is, you know, the villain, right? Like the Blair Witch, she's pretty iconic, but then you think to yourself, what does she look like? Or he, right? And like, I don't know. McFarlane Toys was commissioned and they developed 2 sculpts at the time to give you kind of a like, yeah, this is sort of what she might look like maybe based on their interpretation.
Based on what little details that were actually given.
Yeah, so like you never get to see, and you don't even know by the end of this movie, like, is there even a Blair Witch? Maybe. So I could understand why some people might be like, this category, 0, maybe 1. But on the other hand, this movie is so like iconic that some people might be like, hey, you know what? Give this a 20, right? Blair Witch, she's right up there. Even though we don't see her, this movie paved the way for hundreds of other movies, even though it's not the first found footage film. So I came right down the middle, and I had to give her a 10. I could see both sides of the story. I understand why some people love this movie and why some people hate it. So I gave her a 10.
I wasn't as nice. I gave villain an 8. because I think word of mouth can go really far. And just I loved all the testimonials of different townspeople. Like some of them were like, oh yeah, Blair Witch, that's a thing. I'm like, yeah, they're very like devout, like church going people that are like, we don't go out past 6 p.m. that kind of thing. And then the other like gum smacking like 20 whatever year olds going, that's not real, that's just some BS that gets tourism dollars into our town. I think that's great. Like, I love that they did a lot of word of mouth, but to not follow it up with a lot of visuals, but not even just not a lot of visuals to work with. They didn't like, I can see why that toy maker wouldn't have a lot to go on, because they don't even give us enough description to like, so that whenever we go to bed at night,
you don't know what, there's nothing to
like
be
I don't
afraid
even
of.
know what to imagine right now to like that's in the corner. Like, so I gave it 8 points. I'm sorry, I gave her 8 points.
Well, what about horror then?
The horror. I gave horror 14. And the horror for me really had nothing to do with the Blair Witch, but everything to do with the fact that, like, you've been camping, I've been camping before. I've just been in New Hampshire as a child before, where you're crossing the path to get to your neighbor's house who lives down the street, but you took the woods this time and you're kind of lost and it's kind of dusk and you get scared. And everything, every snap, every twig
is a monster.
You just go, oh, I'm about to die. I'm about to die. I gotta move faster. Your brain goes into like fight or flight, and you're just walking in between. Like, you're 100 yards away from your house, but you might as well be in a different dimension because, the rules don't apply anymore and you're terrified. And that, I could feel that fear, and I think that's what worked really well with them, with the whole like POV, the shaky cam, was that you were walking with them, you were hearing their breathing constantly, and after however many days, and
8,
they were like, I've seen that tree, I've seen this rock, we've doubled back to this point several times. Like, that's terrifying. Like, so I gave it 14.
I mean, that's good. Like, 14's good.
That's great. That's a great score.
Yeah, it's a great score. I gave it a higher score, but, Alfred Hitchcock, like, his, deal, was like, you don't have to show everything. Like, sometimes if you leave it to the viewer's imagination, and I've always disagreed with that.
Unless it's a bird, and then definitely torment your lead actress.
I just think that there's very few movies that do it well. Like, whenever there's a monster movie, like, I want to see the monster. And it's okay if they tease it for a little while. Like, Alien does it really well. Like, you see pieces of the monster, and then at the climax, spoiler alert, you see the alien. And then it's worth it. But in the Blair Witch, you never see the Blair Witch. But I'm okay with that, because I was so afraid.
That you were going to see her.
Right, I'm like, any second now, like when they're running out of the tent screaming like, what the hell is that? And the camera's doing this. It reminded me of the times in my life where, like, my cousin, he was supposed to ride me home, like, on our bicycles before nightfall.
Yes, you brings me back to your childhood when there was nothing there.
The thing is,
but the fear was.
He was talking to this girl in his neighborhood, and he was like, go home, you'll be fine. And I had to pedal, 8 years old, like pedaling my bike home alone. Sun went down, and any minute I could imagine something snatching me up from the woods and tearing me apart. I didn't think I was going to make it home alive, just because it got dark and I was surrounded by woods on both sides.
I'm so glad you made it home.
I'm glad I made it too.
So that we can be here today.
So I gave horror a 17. I think that this was, even in the theater, like I said, surrounded by lots of people, I don't think I felt this much like honest, like, being afraid of a movie. And that didn't happen to me again until The Fourth Kind and Paranormal Activity, actually, in Signs, got real like rises out of me, where I was in the theater, not even home in the dark, but just, there's 100 people in this big room with me, and I'm like, I'm scared, So yeah, I gave it 17 points, and I don't regret that.
How about effects?
Effects, I have a feeling we're going to be very different on effects. I gave effects a 5. There's no music. There's no like real practical effects to speak of. The cinematography is random. Like sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. It's whatever the screaming actors like picked up on the shaky hand cam, and that did add to the movie. But we get some bloody rags and with some teeth in it, and there's some little stick guys. But I didn't feel. I felt like I gave these points in other areas. But as far as effects goes, I gave it a 5. And I'm going to stand by that. That visually, it was a 5 for me under the effects category. Go ahead, let me have it. You tell me what you did. I fully support you in whatever you decided. But that's where I fall. I gave it a 5.
I just want to pull away all of the very unique effects that this movie chose, and then just see how actually scared in the theater you would have been that first time, because it wouldn't happen. It just would not happen without the effects that they chose. There's this myth that, they filmed this for $10,000. No, they filmed this movie for hundreds of thousands of dollars. In the end, it turned out. It took...
With the marketing and stuff.
It took 10 or 15 years to really determine like how big of a budget this movie actually spent to come to fruition. But without all of that money that was expertly placed in, like you said, with the marketing, that's an effect. That is it's not an effect that's directly posited within the movie that you're seeing for an hour and a half, but that is an effect that they chose to have on the audience before they watched the film. And I thought it was genius. I thought the marketing was genius, which I will absolutely pull into effects. But as far as an effects score, I gave it 18 points.
Very wide gap between our scores.
This movie was the first and best found footage film that I've seen. And I don't know if it's the best because, once you see it, it doesn't have the same effect on you. But I can't say that because when we rewatched it, it really still had this thing that these other movies weren't doing. It didn't, nowadays whenever we do this found footage thing, it just feels like they've put too much of a budget into it. And so they're not letting it be like raw and believable. But it deserved all 18 points.
Well, another thing about as there's hundreds of found footage movies now, probably. But
it wasn't even the first to just have been done. It was just the first that made it into my...
Yeah, my friend Jay says it all the time. You need to have a reason for the people to keep filming when their lives are in danger.
Yeah.
And not every movie has a good enough reason to pull that off. The Blair Witch Project does, but how many other movies, are you like, they should stop filming? Like, why are they still
like
throw
in
that camera down?
Cloverfield?
Yeah.
Do you think you're the only person with a smartphone that's experiencing this big citywide No, you're not. So you could just go on and deal with "Is my mom okay?"
Yeah, yeah. You need a good reason
because hundreds of thousands of other people are experiencing it. This is 3 teenagers in the woods.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think they were 21. They
yeah, right.
They had some alcohol in their hotel room, but you know what? Maybe they got it from somebody else.
Yeah.
And so our last category on horror score is the S factor, where we can award up to 20 more points for whatever reason we want to. We just have to justify it. So, Vanessa, you want to take us into S factor?
I think it got a lot of points for reasons I can't exactly put my finger on, but it got 18 points out of me.
Good score.
At least part of the reason is that people may joke about this film a lot, about how like, oh, I knew it wasn't real and all that. But that's part of it. That's part of what makes this film scary, is that for at least half a second before you determined that it wasn't real, it had you going enough to make you prove that it wasn't. You know, like there's no reason why these, you know, maybe buff jocks in the theater, whenever you watched it, were like, it's not real, it's not real. It's because for a second there, they were probably like, wait a minute, this feels real. Enough so that they had to prove that they didn't believe in it. Masculinity thing.
I can see how this movie is not scary at all if you're on your phone for most of it. Like if you've got your phone out and you're on Facebook and then you're on Instagram and you're looking up every once in a while and you're like, oh, nothing's happening. Okay. What? Are they still lost now? Okay, I'm back on my phone. And then the movie's over and you're like, the movie sucked. If you do watch this movie for the first time and you're on your phone the whole time, I can see how this movie might lose you at some point where it's not scary at all. But where I may have shorted this movie on effects with a 5, I gave it 20 points in S Factor because this movie paved the way for a ton of other movies. Maybe lots of those movies are garbage. They are. But there are still other gems in the found footage bubble, or whatever we want to call it, genre, because of this movie. And sure, it wasn't the first one, like we said before, but this is what really kicked it off. Like when Cannibal Holocaust came out, studios weren't lining up to make more movies that were kind of about finding, you know, some taboo footage. But the Blair Witch did it right, and it was accessible, and yeah, so that's, 20 points for me for the S Factor category. I like this movie, and I do understand both sides, because people will hate this movie and be like, oh, trash. Or they'll be like, yeah, that movie was great. But there's not a lot of people in the middle that are like, yeah, that was pretty good, whatever.
It's a great film to watch alone, I think. And it's like equally as great a film to watch like with your pals, like everybody like on the couch, as long as you're all not jerks like on your phone, like you said earlier, like as long as you're all invested in. I think that this is the kind of movie that caters to both kind of situations.
So I started mentioning this before, and I think I got sidetracked, but normally we do some like lesser known movies or smaller movies or lower budget movies, but every 10th movie, like for episode 10 we did Wishmaster, episode 20 was The Descent, and this is episode 30, so we've landed on the Blair Witch Project. So before we total up these scores, we're going to go to our new segment.
And another thing with Vanessa, which might explain why we landed on this specific movie to do as our most known movie for our 10th. Okay. And another thing, before some of you dweebs jump in and say that this movie didn't scare you, I'll just have you know that one of the reasons we chose to do this film is because I was reading Stephen King's horror movie review book, Dance Macabre, and he wrote that the Blair Witch Project is the only horror movie as of yet that he has not been able to watch all the way through because he was so scared. Now, in 1999, you might remember that he got into that big car accident and he was in the hospital for a long time. So his son might have bootlegged this movie and brought it to him, and he watched it on one of those little TVs that had the little VCR tape decks in it, and he literally made his son shut it off halfway through because he couldn't watch it. And this is like the godfather, the grandfather of modern horror, who was so affected by this, who knew all of the tropes and tricks up until this point and wasn't able to stomach it. Obviously, later on, he was able to finish it, but at the same time, to all of you know-it-all jocks out there who was not afraid of it, maybe just immerse yourself a little more into the film next time instead of posturing.
So, now that we're back, that leaves me with a total score of 64 horror score points for 1999's hour and 21 minutes Blair Witch.
The Alan Parsons Project.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. The Blair Witch Project. For me, it got 67 points, which combined is a total of 65.5.
It's a good score.
Points. It's a great score.
Yeah. I will watch this movie again.
Yeah.
At some point.
I did watch it again.
So yeah, that's it for this episode. Catch us in a week or two. We'll have, episode 31 will roll out. We haven't quite picked that movie yet, but it'll be something. So, thanks for watching, and
give like dolls.
Give us 15 minutes. Maybe we'll save you 2 hours.
Stay spooky.
Yeah.